Paget. I work with Vote Common Good. This is Katherine Stewart. And Katherine is somebody that I have learned so much from. And when Katherine told me that she was going to be in Santa Barbara around the time when our organization was going to be in California, we said, well, let's find a way to do an event together. So that's how this all came up. And I'm a big fan of David and of Tim, and knowing that they're part of this church, we reached out and said, could we hold this event here? But Katherine, in a lot of ways, that's sort of how you and I got here. But you have a deeper history here in this area.
I do, that's right. And in fact, I started researching this whole area, the rise of religious nationalism, through an incident at my daughter's public elementary school, Cold Spring School, which is right up the road. Some of you will know it. She was about 6 years old. This was 2009. Our son was a baby. Our daughter was, a first grader. And I heard from another mom at school that a Good News Club was coming to Cold Spring School. And I thought, what could be bad with a group with such a very nice name? And then I heard they were teaching Bible study from a non-denominational standpoint. And I supposed I was quite naive at the time. I thought non-denominational meant non-sectarian. And I do think you can teach about the Bible in public schools from a truly non-sectarian standpoint, as long as you're not promoting one religion over another. But I started to hear stories from other families in town whose kids went to schools where these Good News Clubs had been established, and the kids attending the club were figuring out which of their classmates were not Christian or were the wrong kind of Christian, and they would say, you're going to go to hell. And I know it's true because I learned it in school, and they don't teach things that aren't true in school. And this really kind of astonished me. I realized that kids can't make a distinction. Little kids, we're talking elementary age children, cannot make a distinction between what is taught to them in school and what is sponsored by the school. They think if there's an adult in the classroom teaching, you got to follow this one religion, this one form of one religion. Let's be very clear about that. A very deeply, I would say, reactionary or fundamentalist form of the faith. They think that that's what their school wants them to believe. So I was really astonished that this kind of thing could be legal and possible given our constitutional principle of church-state separation. And I started to research how that had come about, and the more I learned, the more concerned I became. So I just followed that thread, and that leads me to where I am today.
And so part of your response to that is that taking your skills as a journalist, and you wrote a book called The Good News Club.
That's right.
Then that led you to writing a book called Power Worshippers, which talks about the story of how all of this is funded.
Absolutely. When I was researching that first book, The Good News Club, I recognized that the Good News Club was just one small part of a larger war on public education. But the more I kept researching, the more I learned, I realized the war on public education, which we're seeing a lot of today, is really just one small part of a larger war on American democracy and its norms and institutions. So I've focused on, look, this movement would be nowhere without very deep-pocketed funders, many of whom are frankly less interested in right-wing positions in the so-called culture wars than they are in far-right economic policies that are actually making it, intensifying economic inequality, making it harder for families to succeed. This is a movement whose leaders claim to stand for family values, but the same groups funding, initiatives that are trying to force their form of religion into our laws and society in all these different ways. They're also funding initiatives to diminish the rights for the workforce. And they want low taxes or no taxes for the rich, minimal regulation of businesses, minimal regulation or no regulation of extractive industries that are harming our environment. So it's all one piece of a larger puzzle.
How long ago was it that you wrote Good News Club? When did all this happen?
That came out in 2012, that book.
Okay, so a dozen years ago. You've been thinking about this for a long time.
Yes.
When people were coming in tonight, someone said to me, this whole topic of Christian nationalism totally new to me. I don't know what any of it means. So we get it that some of you have been thinking about this for minutes now, and some people have been thinking about it for a decade plus.
That's right.
And other scholars have been thinking about this for much longer.
That's
because
right.
America has always struggled with what to do with the role of religion in our society. It has been a constant conversation, so much so that at the establishment of a constitution, they immediately made sure to have an amendment that talked about it, right?
That's right.
The establishment clause that the government will not establish a religion. Because it's been a really difficult thing for the people who have made up the history that we call the United States to understand. Your response was to do what you do as a journalist, which is to write a book and to help people, and multiple books, and more books are coming, and to be a journalist expert on these things. And you're on the news, and we're going to talk about the movie that you've produced and that you're part of. Our response was to get in a bus and travel around the country and try to say faith, hope, and love, supporting democracy for all. So outside you'll see that bus that Dan mentioned, and we drive around the country and hold events. This photo was taken in Eagle Pass, Texas 3 weeks ago, when a group of Christian nationalist truckers decided to go to Eagle Pass, Texas to try to push Christian nationalism. We heard about it and drove down, and that's America, who's one of the organizers in Eagle Pass. That we had the privilege of working with. So I bring that up because everyone has a different response to this, right? Everyone tries to find a way, whether it's to travel the country and host conversations and engage, or it's to write books. We're going to show a video here in a moment of Christian nationalists saying Christian nationalist things. But before we do, would you give your quick response, which I think is so genius, when people say, Katherine Stewart, you're an expert on Christian nationalism and its impact on democracy. How do you talk about it when someone asks you what it's all about?
Well, Christian nationalism is not Christianity. It's not a religion. It's a political ideology that basically boils down to the idea that America is a Christian nation. Christian, of course, referring to a very reactionary form of the Christian religion. And they say that our laws should be based on the Bible. But this ideology is really a tool for a leadership-driven political machine that turns this mythology into political power. And the movement is leadership-driven, and it's also organization-driven. It's not the rank and file, the average sort of voter that they draw into their circle that are in charge of the agenda. It's really the leaders in charge of the agenda. And they have all these different organizations. It's incredibly well-funded. This movement would be nowhere without a subsection of very wealthy people in this country that frankly have decided to invest their fortunes in the destruction of our democracy. There's no other way to put it.
When you say it's well-funded, what's your estimate on how much money goes to support movements that are supporting Christian nationalism in America?
Goodness. I mean, I can just give you some examples of the different initiatives funding this movement. We have the National Christian Foundation, sort of donor-advised funds. It's one of several donor-advised funds that funnels a lot of money to religious right networks and organizations like Heritage Foundation, I would say, Family Research Council, Liberty Council, the sort of legal sphere of this movement. But because it's a donor-advised fund, you can't figure out who the individual donors are. Donors will put their money into a big pile. Mm-hmm. They disperse, I believe it's like $1.5 billion in the last year, or maybe over, I mean, it's just a huge amount of money. But then you have like very well-resourced individual funders, people like Barry Seid, who, by the way, is not Christian. He's Jewish, and he's from Chicago, an octogenarian billionaire, who donated $1.6 billion to create an organization called the Marble Freedom Trust in order to sort of promote right-wing politics and initiatives. And he put Leonard Leo in charge of that. I don't know, I would love to see a show of hands. Has anybody ever heard of Leonard Leo? I'm seeing a good number of hands. Well, so Leonard Leo was for many years a leader in the Federalist Society, which is an organization, very important organization that plays a very important role in cultivating and promoting talent, sort of justices with the right ideological views for the courts. I mean, one of the goals of this movement is to take over the courts. They know if you can capture the courts, you can promote policies that people don't really like or approve of. So, I mean, these are just two examples, but there are so many others. The Bradley Foundation, the Sky Foundation, the Wilkes brothers, fracking billionaires from Texas, Tim Dunn. I mean, there are just the list of the DeVos Prince family juggernaut. It's like, just for fun. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize how rich these people are. So just Google Betsy DeVos's yachts, just for fun one afternoon. You'll
Just the yachts.
It's just the yachts. And here's a woman who really doesn't believe in public education at all and was put in charge of the Department of Education. Have we talked about Project 2025 yet?
No, we
Oh
haven't.
my gosh. Well, another interesting thing to Google. It was coordinated by the Heritage Foundation, which is one of the sort of leading, I would say, policy groups and think tanks. And it's a 900-page document that is basically a blueprint for the next Republican administration, the Trump administration, I gather is what they're hoping for. It really covers how each department is going to be totally reformulated. And one of the things they want to do is eliminate the Department of Education. They're just, the hostility to public education runs so deep in this movement because there's this sort of hostility to the principles of pluralism and equality and, frankly, critical thinking as well. I mean, one of the great things about public schools is it teaches kids how to get along with others, including those who are different. And public schools have to serve every family, including kids with disabilities. But they really want to take all that money and funnel it to schools that are often promoting religious and right-wing economic ideology.
And sometimes there are movements where the people leading them don't tell you what they're really up to. And people have to find ways to figure out what's really going on. You think about the tobacco industry in the 1950s and things that came out in the 1970s and 80s, right? They had secret documents talking about what they really knew and what they didn't do. That's not what's going on here. These Christian nationalists are not hiding it. They are out in full force, saying it as clear as they can, literally shouting it from the rooftops if they need to, and in conferences and in materials. And sometimes because it's so blatant, people feel like, well, that can't really be what they're doing. So can I show this video, or do you want to say something?
Please.
Do you want to say something about
please
that?
show the video.
Okay, so this video is one that I actually saw in the film that Katherine has helped produce, that Rob Reiner is the prime producer of. We'll show you a little piece of that in a moment. But that Rob Reiner film called God and Country is based on Katherine's book. But this clip here that we're going to show you in a moment is something called the Watchman Decree. And it's a group of people at a big conference stating the things that they believe. It's 3 minutes long and is really such a blatantly clear articulation. And there might be moments where in the midst of the horror you could be feeling, you're also just going to maybe think to yourself, why in the world are they talking about that? At least if it strikes you the way it strikes me. So if all things work, here it is.
All right, go ahead. All right, Dutch, lead us.
So we'll read it together, okay? As a patriot of faith, I attest my allegiance first and foremost to the kingdom of God and the Great Commission. Secondly, I agree to be a watchman over our nation concerning its people and their rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whereas we, the church, are God's governing body on the earth. Whereas we have been given legal power from heaven and now exercise our authority. Whereas we are God's ambassadors and spokespeople over the earth. Whereas through the power of God, we are the world influencers. Whereas because of our covenant with God, we are equipped and delegated by Him to destroy every attempted advance of the country was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. We know the truth, therefore we stand for truth and will never be deceived. We will never stop fighting. We will never, ever, ever give up or give in. We will take our country back. We will honor the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. America, shall we say? Now give it praise. I like that. Wow, I like that. Do you like that?
It's loud, sorry about that, and really on point, right? We do trainings, whole trainings, hour and a half long, on the confronting the threat of Christian nationalism, what it is, helping to understand it. There are times doing these trainings, we do them for religious groups, civic groups, where we say things about Christian nationalism, and I can see that people are like, maybe you're being a bit hyperbolic here in the things that we say Christian nationalism. And then you show them something like this and like, no, we're not, we're actually underplaying what they're actually saying. I mean, that is stark.
It is stark, but unfortunately, it's not a fringe movement anymore. For a long time, the sort of Seven Mountains dominionists, people who believe in what they call the Seven Mountains or molders of culture, which is a sort of theme within sort of a strain of, say, charismatic religion. They were really not allowed anywhere near the center of power in Republican politics. But now the language of the sort of spirit warrior has pervaded a lot of the movement, even among those who are themselves not like charismatic or Pentecostal. And they've pervaded, the many lawmakers. I think about Alabama Chief Justice Tom Parker, who is openly Seven Mountains Dominionist, has been praised by other Seven Mountains Dominionists like Johnny Enlow for spreading this ideology. The Seven Mountains Dominionism, just very briefly, is the idea that a certain kind of Christian, right? Not all Christians. Not no, not you guys, sorry, has to take, control of the seven mountains or molders of culture, which include things like government, education, religion, entertainment, business, that kind of thing. So they see this as taking dominion back from Satan. It's the idea that they should basically control every aspect of our lives. So Tom Parker, the Chief Justice of Alabama, who ruled against IVF, saying that this is unbiblical and cited scripture in his decision, he is an open Seven Mountains Dominionist. And then, I think that it's sort of like they said the quiet part out loud, and a lot of Republican lawmakers and others are trying to sort of dial back on this. But the way they define life begins at conception, the way they define it, it would make IVF impossible, as well as many of the most popular and effective forms of birth control, like birth control pills and IUDs and things like that. But we have to remember, they're not just about, it's not going to end with abortion, and it's not going to end with IVF, and it's not going to end with birth control. They really want to control our reproductive lives, but it's not going to end there. They want to control every aspect of government and society. So it's a grotesquely anti-democratic.
And they say it sometimes it can sound alarmist when people hear people accusing another group of saying, you actually want to take over every area. They're saying, we are God's authority to govern the earth, and in every arena, we will demand that it be led in this way, in these biblical values at the judicial level, righteousness at the congressional level, and at the executive level, and at the local communities. Civic communities, government communities. There is a movement, and it doesn't stop with the United States. It's a global movement to do that very thing in every nation. Now, Katherine, I think that's a new version of Christian nationalism. America has always struggled with this. From the puritanical time of the Pilgrims, there were actually theocracies running in the country. There were
Gerald K. Smith, who started the America First Party, and he had a sort of Christian nationalist party.
It's a struggling with faith and democracy has been is as American as it comes. That's why it's good for us to talk about it. But this version of Christian nationalism, it is new, isn't it? This thing we just saw on the screen, the thing that's spreading, the thing Michael Flynn is doing around the country, the thing that's spreading, the thing that led to the insurrection on January 6th. This is a new kind of Christian nationalism. Would you agree?
That's absolutely true. This movement has invested in the infrastructure. There's been over decades. So they have more political power than they ever have for many years. Again, the religious right portrayed themselves as, we just want a seat in the noisy forum of American democracy. We just want to be able to articulate our values in the public square. And they, called themselves values voters and said that they stand for the American family. But they're really kind of, as their power has grown, they've become more and more extremist. I think in many regards, the extremism was always there, but it was sort of prettified. But we have to remember that the people who, for many years, claimed that they wanted that reactionary religion should rule our laws, and we think about pro-slavery theologians who called slavery God's established order, and they called the abolitionists who are anchoring their commitment to emancipation in their understanding of the Christian faith. They were called atheists and communists. They were called, ungodly. They were called the worst names possible by people like, Dabney and James Henley Thornwell, these sort of pro-slavery theologians who had just enormous power at the time. So there's always been that kind of struggle between those who want to use religion sort of to promote common good, values of equality and justice, and those who want to use it to establish hierarchies that they claim are ordained by God.
And this is happening not only in the evangelical tradition, which is the tradition that I come from, it's in Catholic tradition, it's in mainline Protestant traditions. It's not as if Christian nationalism is only one religious denominational brand. It really spans across the religious imagination in
Absolutely,
America.
and there are people who contribute their support to Christian nationalism who are not themselves Christian at all. Often people describe this as about the evangelicals, but you're absolutely right. Movement would be, when I think about the leadership cadre, again, this is a leadership-driven movement. Movement would be nowhere without sort of cross-denominational collaboration.
They even say it in there, like, we will set aside all of our denominational theology in order to, and we watched this today and talked about it as our team, and Rob, who you're going to meet in a moment, made a very good point. It ends with the idea, and America will be saved. That's a theological argument that people might want to call for, but you could see it there in that decree that it would become a political argument. So they're borrowing religious ideas and the idea of saving America and putting it into the context of politics as the means by which it's saved. So they use the religious language and system in order to accomplish these political means.
It's true. Some of the ways that I do my research is you have to go sit in the pews and you have to go to conferences where leadership is gathering. So I've done a lot of these things. And at some of the churches that I've been to, they'll say the church is not a cruise ship, the church is a battleship. And they'll also bring out, a lot of the language. They'll bring together a lot of pastors to these church presentations because they know pastors are often the most trusted members of their community. If you can get the pastors, you can often get many, or if not most, of the members of the congregation. So they devote enormous resources to creating these sort of pastor gatherings where they'll reach all these pastors and tell them that they've got to turn out their congregations to vote their biblical values. Now, when they say biblical, they mean, number one, abortion, number two, same-sex marriage, like a handful.
And apparently energy independence, which was a curious little line to have up there, right?
That was really interesting.
Yeah, like you only had 13 things, and one of them was energy independence. That was curious, yeah. Okay, Catherine, I could talk to you all night and would love to. You're gonna hear Catherine be in conversation with a number of other faith leaders who want to learn from her about a variety of topics that relate to this. The thing about this movement and the question about faith and democracy is that it involves a wide spectrum of issues, not only one. So you're going to hear conversations with Catherine from different people that'll go for 15 minutes each, and then we'll pivot. There'll be little things in between to help us pivot to the next conversation. The reason we're doing it this way is we want you to feel like you are now part of a conversation with the people in this room that you've been having elsewhere. Something got you here, someone invited you, someone talked about it. We've been talking about this for a long while, and we want you to feel like you're part of it. So we want you to hear these different conversations as they go. And many of the people who are doing these conversations aren't doing it as a presentation. They're not sure what they're going to talk about. They have a particular topic, and they're going to start talking with Catherine about it. Okay, so that's how it's going to go. We think this is going to be really fun, and we'll be done by 8 o'clock and all. But Catherine, I want to talk a bit about this film that you're in. Did you ever think you would have your written material have the motionpictures.org?
Produced by Rob Reiner. It's not as funny as Spinal Tap, but it's still worth a listen.
I mean, my
It's
friends,
still worth a watch.
you're in this documentary. I have the privilege of being in this documentary. My friends are like, you're in a Rob Reiner produced documentary, and it's not a funny one.
Nobody's
That's
laughing.
That's a
Nobody's
real bummer.
laughing.
Yeah, no, there's hardly a laughing point. But it just came out a few weeks ago. It's in theaters now. It's going to be available on streaming. Congratulations
Thank you
on
so
your book
much.
being the center of it. This would not exist without you and without your book.
Well, the important thing about this film is it brings in a number of voices from many different viewpoints,
Yeah.
frankly. Conservative folks who are more on the sort of liberal and progressive side, people who are very religious, a lot of Christian voices from different viewpoints,
Yeah.
starting points. And so thank you so much.
It's an hour and a half long. Not the thing you're going to see now, but you're going to see the trailer. Has anyone in the room seen the film yet? God and Country? Okay. I hope you see it soon. This is going to be a little trailer. Someone I love very much saw the film in Minneapolis, where I live, with a group of us. And driving home to our house, she said to my wife, well, I guess I'd be more on the Christian nationalist side of all that. So apparently you could watch the film, and if you're a Christian nationalist, feel like that made our case pretty well, and I'm with the Christian nationalists, as opposed to, with you. Here's a little trailer for it, and then after the trailer ends, Nathan Epsall, who's the executive director of Faithful America, will be in conversation with Catherine. 15 minutes.
America and Christianity are like baseball and apple pie, and we celebrate them together.
I was 16, 17 years old when I became a Christian.
I'm an evangelical minister.
I've been a Christian my whole life.
I'm a Christian nationalist. I have nothing to be ashamed of because that's what most Americans are.
Is Christian nationalism Christian? No, it isn't.
We should be blazing forth as a countercultural example, and instead, we're leading the charge of malice and division.
Christian nationalism uses Christianity as a means to an end, that end being some form of authoritarianism.
Being a Christian is about the values of inclusion. Christian nationalism is certainly not based on the values of the gospel.
God wants America to be saved. They're told over and over and over again that you're in danger.
You need to fight if you don't want to lose your country.
We are in a civil war between good and evil.
This is not a movement about Christian values. This is about Christian power.
What happens to the people who don't believe this stuff?
We are on the precipice.
God is on our side.
We're taking our nation back.
The thing that keeps me up at night is that we lose democracy.
Does that seem possible?
Yes.
Christianity at its best is committed to love and truth and justice. If we do this right, what a country we will be.
Hello.
My name is Nathan Imsel. I am the executive director of Faithful America, also an Episcopal priest who's very happy to be in a Congregationalist church. If you don't know Faithful America, we are the largest online community of grassroots Christians putting faith into action for love and social justice and against white Christian nationalism. We run online campaigns like MoveOn.org or Color of Change, groups like that, for social justice and progressive Christians to advocate for moral policies and to take on the religious right and Christian nationalism. And whenever I do a webinar for our members or do a podcast interview about Christian nationalism, the book I recommend most on the topic is The Power Worshippers.
Well, whenever I do a talk, organizations that I speak about are your organization, Faithful America and Vote Common Good. Yes. So there we go.
So Katherine and I, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight. Doug and Katherine are friends, and Vote Common Good and Faithful America right now are working to counter witness against some of Franklin Graham's events, including here in California, so that this worked out with Katherine in the middle of all that is perfect. Katherine and I were talking, and we agreed that the religious right and the Christian nationalist movement use a lot of tools that progressive Christians, moderate Christians, never Trump conservative Christians leave on the table. And I think that we can name those tools, but I think often mainline Protestants and progressive Catholics shy away from doing things we see the religious right do because we don't want to be like them. That's wrong. But there's a way to use some of those same tools or to show up in Jesus' name in a more responsible way, in a way that uses our faith politically to advocate for freedom for all, to advocate for rights for all, not just for ourselves and those like us.
Absolutely. I mean, I could talk about one of those tools that that is in wide use in a lot of conservative churches, that they have these manuals to establish something called a culture impact team. And the idea is that they, as to respect the tax code, pastors are not supposed to endorse candidates from the pulpit, but they can tap members of the congregation to do this sort of, I would say, partisan politicking for them. So what they'll do is, this culture impact team manual covers every single aspect of establishing a kind of messaging network aimed at turning out the congregation to vote a certain way. So, they'll have people, and the culture impact team manual will talk about issues like the environment and then say, well, these are the resources, and they'll point directly to these anti-environmental issues, or organizations and think tanks. When they talk about reproductive rights, they'll point the way to the most sort of strict anti-abortion resources. So they really get people, it's a way of getting the congregations to vote. And then they have incredibly sophisticated data tools that they give their pastors so they can see what percentage of the congregation voted in the last election and who didn't vote. And then they actually have an individual voter lookup so they can see which ones didn't vote. They can't necessarily see how they voted, but they can, you can imagine the conversations. Mrs. Jones, I see you didn't vote in the last election. It's your biblical duty. You have to vote your biblical values. So it's really a way of mobilizing the conservative Christian vote. This is a movement that is a minority of our population, but they are disproportionately mobilized. And that's why they have the political power that they do. Much of that sort of Christian nationalist machine that we were talking about, I was talking about earlier with Doug Padgett, is really, it turns into a giant voter turnout machine in election seasons. And that's the reason that they have really punched above their political weight.
I learned about these culture impact teams from the Power Worshippers, and I'm actually a little enamored with them. I think, are there ways, mobilization is a good thing. Persuasion matters. How do I talk to the Trump voters in my life? But also, in any election, there's always the debate, do we win by mobilizing or do we win by persuading? And you win by both. And that's not just true of elections, it's true of any kind of change you want to make. And so thinking about ways to mobilize social justice Christians, and is there a way to use similar tools, but in a more responsible way. I did some climate research in seminary. I was getting a degree in environmental management at the same time, and I was looking at how churches do or don't engage on climate, and the churches that were engaged in completely non-political, nonpartisan ways, right? This can be an environmental prayer garden, solar panels. It tended to be kind of like the culture impact teams. It would be a team of volunteers doing the work, but that had been blessed and authorized and given theological credibility by the pastor. And it's a similar model where you set up that true grassroots engine within the church to do more work for democracy that is then somehow resourced from the outside by, in this case, Tony Perkins and David Barton. But is there a way that churches like this one, or my church, could be setting up these teams not to endorse candidates, but to have our own issue guides, or to at least have souls to the polls like the black churches do?
It's really important to engage people in democracy building. And, there is no substitute for turning out the vote in a country where 40 to 50% of people don't turn out to vote, and an additional number of people have their votes essentially stolen from them because of race-based gerrymandering, voter suppression, and other dirty tricks. You don't need a majority of the country to win an election season. You just need again, that disproportionately mobilized minority. So tools that can help engage people in the political process, understand what's at stake. I've been to so many gatherings where speakers will say, this election is about judges, judges, judges. Now, do we think about elections this way? No. Often people are encouraged to think, like, who do I want to have a beer with? Who do I like? Who do I want in my house? What really matters is what that person is going to do, the judges they're going to appoint, the people they're going to have running their cabinet. So I think all the things that can help us understand how we can see our values reflected in the public square would be very helpful.
It's not just elections, though. It's year-round. I've wondered this. I'm making an assumption. Is it the CITs, the culture impact teams, that are also driving these churches to show up at school board meetings outside of election season to yell about the groomers at these meetings?
Oh, there are all kinds of separate public school-facing initiatives, but it points to a fact, which is that so much of politics is local, and it's really vital to engage in the local level, because if you don't, you're really ceding ground to these other organizations. They often appear to be a local initiative powered by local personalities, but what they are often is like groups like Mom for Liberty. There's like AstroTurf organizations. The money, the coordination, the organization is often coming from the top, and then they get a lot of these, local level clubs to sort of follow the patterns that they have established and the materials that they have established.
I'd love to see more social justice-minded churches printing in their bulletins when the school board meeting will go, and not screaming when we show up, but just saying, actually, as a parent or a grandparent, I could really use this LGBTQ book in the curriculum. It would help my kids. We could be doing that too, but in a much different way.
Yeah.
But they do use it the wrong ways. They use it to spread misinformation. Can you talk about misinformation?
Oh gosh, it's really sad. I went to this one gathering called Faith Wins. It's part of one of these, again, national initiatives. It's they do gatherings at churches. I went to this one in Virginia. They had, dozens of pastors there, and they had speaker after speaker, people like David Barton, who is a sort of key Christian nationalist myth maker. I call him actually the Where's Waldo of the Christian nationalist movement in my book, The Power Worshippers, because he's everywhere. He's deeply involved in partisan politics. He's very involved in sort of spreading myth. He,
We put out a list every year at Faithful America of the top Christian nationalist false prophets. So we have named David Barton a false prophet.
And every year he's going to... Anyway, so his son was there spreading the sort of, fables. And then they had others, speakers, sort of getting out the vote. And then they had this guy named Hogan Gidley, who was introduced as an elections integrity specialist. He's a former member of the Trump administration, and he was there to share his expertise on election integrity. He gets up there and he just tells one lie after another. He said, one of the things that really struck me, he said, you guys all saw what happened in Arizona. Now, this was after there had been a Republican-led investigation in Arizona to look for voter fraud. And this Republican-led investigation, they called themselves the Cyber Ninjas, they turned up nothing. But here he is sort of intimating that they'd found this terrible voter fraud when the Republican-led committee themselves said, we found nothing. He said, oh, dead people are voting. People are voting 3 or 4 times, just sort of spreading lies about the 2020 election. So you have this kind of thing actually happening, unfortunately, in some of these church presentations.
I think disinformation and misinformation are one of the biggest threats to democracy, because they're behind all the other threats that keep perpetuating them.
And you've done so much work around Reawaken America. Why don't you explain to everybody what Reawaken America is?
The Reawaken America tour, show of hands, do my Doug impersonation, show of hands, how many people have heard of the Reawaken America tour? Okay, so Michael Flynn, you know Michael, how many folks know Michael Flynn? Yeah, so General Flynn, the disgraced former fellow national security advisor under Trump, and it was partly behind the January 6th insurrection, and a host of other MAGA celebrities, Roger Stone, Eric Trump is usually there. All these MAGA celebrities take about 24 Christian nationalist pastors on the road. And roughly once a month, they're slowing down now, they go to a different megachurch or convention center, and for 2 days, they mix baptisms and praise music with the worst vaccine denial you've ever heard and election denial.
Oh, every conspiracy imagines a great replacement, they're going to microchip you, all this kind of stuff.
The vaccines are Jeffrey Epstein's DNA mixed with Bill Gates' nanotechnology to create a new transhuman species. I'm not making that up. That's what Mike Flynn's new best friend, Clay Clark, says at all these things and has convinced Flynn and Roger Stone and Eric Trump of. And we go on and on about crazy it is. Doug's seen these. He's been. Faithful America is chasing Mike Flynn around the country at these with our mobile billboard, and we train local pastors about Christian nationalism and organize them just to have a press conference. And we'll have 6 pastors and a mobile billboard, and Mike Flynn will have 5,000 people inside, but it shows the press that there's a different Christian voice. And we get half the local press coverage that Mike Flynn gets. When there's an article, half of it is Mike Flynn, but half of it is the Christian counter voice. And all of a sudden, it's not Christians came to town and said this, it's Christians challenged Flynn when Flynn said this in Jesus' name. And that doesn't stop the misinformation from circling in the churches that came out to Flynn's thing, but it helps isolate it. It keeps it from spreading. We have 1 minute. So thoughts?
Disinformation is so important to the rise of this movement, because if you can separate people from the facts, it makes them easier to control. And the overriding message in these spaces is about fear. You may get people really frightened that, they're coming for you, they're gonna change your gender against your will, they're gonna, whatever, the vaccines are gonna kill you, they're gonna take every cent you own, and then that is a real way for them to say, Trump is yours. Our savior. You go to these spaces, you see a lot of imagery of Trump with eagles and Jesus on his, it's really a pro-Trump conspiracy fest.
And we've seen studies that show you remove people from the sources of misinformation for 3 weeks, and they start questioning every conspiracy theory. That's really hard to do, so at least we can show them love and pray in the meantime. Thank you. So good to be with you.
Thank you. So great to chat.
And before I sit down, I want to take a picture of all your pretty faces.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rob Ryersey. I am a longtime pastor in the state of Arkansas, and I am now the political director of Vote Common Good. Get to head around the country and talk with folks. And Katherine, I want to talk a little bit about the political side of things, because we've been kind of talking theory and funding and history and background, but let's talk about the political side of things. And there's a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, we've talked a little bit already about education. You mentioned that there's this real hatred for public education. And in your conversation with Nathan, it came up a little bit about school boards. One of the things that I've noticed is that since conservatives took the Supreme Court, it seems to me that school boards have become the front line in the culture war. Have you seen that? Can you talk about that a little bit?
I've actually seen that, and I think there are several reasons for that. Number one, if you engage people in politics at the local level, they're successful, they can be trained to go up. So you get people involved in running for school board. For many people with political careers, that's their first entree into the political sphere, and then they can run for something else and sort of go up the chain. I think that's one reason. Another reason is there's just so much money in education, and the movement is determined. Look, a lot of their churches are losing members and struggling financially. But they know if they can get a portion of those public education dollars directed over to their churches for schools or religious programming, then the money will flow without end. So part of that activism around public education, the sort of hysteria around CRT, which is, by the way, not taught in public schools, and number two, it's become a form of race baiting. They are trying to diminish people's faith in their neighborhood schools, and that will clear the way for privatization. And also now they're openly trying to, other initiatives that will direct money to religious schools, they're trying to openly establish religious charter schools, fully funded by the state.
Yeah, all over the country, there is just a huge movement to take public dollars and send them to private religious schools. Where I live in Arkansas, there was a bill passed that does that very thing. In the past year, and it's all on this idea of this is going to give parents the opportunity to choose a better school for their child. In the first year that the LEARNS Act in Arkansas was in place, 7% of students actually transferred from public schools to private schools.
That money in the vouchers is not going to cover your public school. They've done these your private school, they've done these studies, so a lot of the people making use of vouchers are already, frankly, quite wealthy. Yep. And are, oh, great, I got a little discount on my really expensive private school. So.
Yeah, so it's super interesting. I think when I spend a lot of time talking with, particularly with people that are organizing around school board issues, and sometimes people will say to me, "Well, what do we do about all this? What do we do?" And can we convince people? Can we persuade people? And I'm at the point now where my answer is, I think the thing we have to do about Christian nationalism is beat it at the polls.
Absolutely. There is no substitute for getting out the vote. Ralph Reed, he's one of the movement's most seasoned and astute activists, a sort of strategist, high-level strategist. He said, pay no attention to the polls. Our numbers are shrinking. All that matters is who turns out on election day, and he is right.
Yeah. One of the things that we've observed is that candidates for office on the right tend to be very comfortable, very natural, kind of moving in and out of faith-based spaces. When candidates on the left tend to struggle with that more, maybe comfortable in black churches, but less comfortable interacting with evangelicals. And Doug and I once had a congresswoman say to us, "Those evangelicals, they freak me out." And we're like, yeah, they freak us out too, but they can tell that they freak you out, and they're picking up on that vibe. What advice would you give a candidate for office, or what do you think? People that want to resist this Christian nationalist pull, how do they do that in the political realm? What can they do?
I think you can express your faith in the public square as a politician in any number of ways while still acknowledging and respecting the political diversity of our country, and also by appealing to commonly shared values. And that's how our policy should be written, according to, transparently deliberated, according to a set of facts that are actually true and not just conspiracy. So, we see this, politicians doing this all the time, and it's not problematic. What we see on the other side instead is people saying, a kind of reactionary nationalism, this idea that they're insiders in America, those who believe correctly, and they're the true Americans, and then there are outsiders who are not believing correctly, whether they're Christian or not Christian. It's basically a way of saying that, some people belong in this country and other people don't, and they're not real Americans. And we see this happening in other countries when you have leaders like Vladimir Putin in Russia, or Orban in Hungary, or Erdogan in Turkey. When these leaders are binding themselves very tightly to ultra-conservative religious authorities in their own countries in order to divide their own countries, it's divide and conquer. It's an old strategy. They're bubble wrapping themselves in sanctimony in order to thwart any investigation into their own corruption, because religious, the sort of authoritarian leadership always brings corruption, cronyism, often nepotism, and they want to shield themselves against any investigation of their own abuses against their own people.
We could easily name elected leaders who are openly Christian nationalists. Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. We can boom, boom, boom. We can name them. When you think about the other side of things, are there any names that come to mind for you of people that are doing it well?
The other side, people who are sort of combating religious
nationalism. Because it feels like we can name that side. Like, I'm curious if for you think, you know what, that's somebody that's engaging in all of this in a really effective way. I wish more people were following that pattern.
Well, I think anyone who is trying to affirm democracy, the institutions of democracy, and our democratic principles, there are a lot of politicians, and I don't want to play favorites right here, sorry.
No, it's all right. I always say, listen, it's like, being a parent, you love all your kids, but you do have a favorite, right?
We also have to remember that a lot of the people who are sort of active in this movement, you might not everybody who is part of these think tanks or part of this sort of political infrastructure, you might not call them a Christian nationalist, but what they are doing is lending support to a Christian nationalist agenda. Religious nationalism, like authoritarianism, is a dysfunction of political systems. It's not just an attitude embraced by the rank and file, or a label embraced by people who are lending support to this dysfunction.
Yep. Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
Doug's shaking his head at me. In the political world, do you think the attitude of Christian nationalists are the enemy, and and anybody who's kind of going through some kind of political shift or change, they're like, well, what took you so long? You should have realized this sooner.
We have to embrace people where they are. I think it's great when people change their minds based on new information. A lot of people I've been, working in this area for so many years. A lot of the people I've met are lovely people. They love their families. They care about their communities. They truly believe they're doing what's right. Many of them have been sort of, living in this world of misinformation. And so if you're in this world where the sky is red, you just think the sky is red all the time, and somebody tells you it's not. You're like, what are you talking about? But when new information starts to come through, I think we should embrace that and not shame anybody for changing their minds.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So for about 15 years, I was a worship pastor, and I grew up in a church, and it looked a lot like this. Had these big, beautiful beams and high ceilings, and at the front of the sanctuary was this big, beautiful 40-foot stained glass cross. And one of the first times I remember something's not quite right with this equation. It was 4th of July, and we raised this massive American flag that obstructed the cross. You could just barely see the cross shining through. I just said, like, that doesn't seem right. The symbolism was just too thick and too weird for me. And over the years, I've come to realize that this isn't about Jesus when it comes to Christian nationalism. It's about power. And so I kind of wrote this song about that. I saw that good people that I loved and trusted were throwing their weight behind a man like Donald Trump. And so this is called Hymn for the 81%, and it references the 81% of white evangelicals that voted for Trump, even after hearing about him bragging about sexual assault or making fun of disabled people, and then continued to say, this is our guy, even after every line in the sand was crossed. So Christian nationalism, I think when it comes down to it, is about giving up your values in order to get that power. That's what this song is about. I grew up in your churches, Sunday morning and evening service. I knelt in tears at the foot of the rugged cross. Taught me every life is sacred. Feed the hungry and clothe the naked. I learned from you the highest law is love. And I believed you when you said that I should trust the words in red to guide my steps through a wicked world. And I assumed you'd do the same. So imagine my dismay when I watched you lead the sheep straight to the wolves. You said to love the lost. Well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth. Well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Oh, they started putting kids in cages, ripping mothers from their babies, and I looked to you to speak on their behalf. Oh, but all I heard was silence, or worse, you justified it, singing glory, hallelujah, raise the flag. See, your fear had turned to hatred, but you baptized it with language torn from the pages of the good book. Yeah, you weaponized religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls. And you said to love the lost. Well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth. Well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Come home, come home. You're better than this. Oh, you taught me better than this. Come home, come home. You're better than this. I used to think you were better than this. Yeah, come home. Come home, oh, too naive, or I just didn't want to see that there's always been a little poison in the well. Our churches sit on stolen land, a nation built by stolen hands, and we use the Bible to justify it all. Yeah, from slavery and segregation to mass incarceration, this is who we are, but not who we have to be. There's a lot of work to do to pull up the evil by the roots, but repentance has to come before there's peace. You said to love the lost, I'm trying to love you now. You said to speak the truth, that's why I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome, injustice roll down. 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 Thank you.
Well, that video we saw earlier with all that yelling and shouting and stomping and fussing, total lack of humility. I thought I read somewhere in the Bible about being humble. I showed up this afternoon. I had this T-shirt from way back in the day that I got from Amnesty International. And Doug said, "Oh, you need to talk tonight." So here I am. We spoke a little while ago, a couple hours ago, about what we might talk about. And I said, when I showed up to talk with the Oahu Association Church and Ministry Committee to get my, what do we call that, before I was going to go to seminary. And I had just completed a master's degree in political science, and they said, you just completed one degree, why, now you're going into the ministry. I said, it seemed to me to be useful to have a better understanding of the way society, kind of is put together. Might be helpful in the church. And it has been. It has been. Before I ask you a question, I'd like to add to that. I've been very privileged to visit the Philippines on 2 occasions and Cuba on 2 occasions, and to see how our partners in the faith community have dealt with oppressive socioeconomic situations there, have gone to great lengths to make their livelihoods work. And I'll spare you any details just to say that it's been really hard. And those of us who witnessed that have come away totally impressed with standing over against power structures. And I am grateful for my understanding from that background in political science to say, it's good to stand up in this pulpit or sitting on this stool, as I often do on a Sunday, to be able to critique the power structures and not encourage the people in the pews to say, we need to be in that. We need to taint ourselves. We need to have the ring. No, we don't want the ring, but we need to be able to critique it. How do you talk to other faith communities and help them see you don't want to be contaminated with the ring? You don't need to be seduced by the power, but to understand what that power does and how it corrupts the faith.
Well, I think people are really struggling. Thank you so much for that question, and thank you for your own backstory about your study of politics and power and faith. I think what many people in many communities of faith are really struggling with is, how did this happen? How did our faith, which is supposed to be about love and caring for the least of these, how has it been so exploited? Why are we seeing this kind of rhetoric in our politics and in our laws that is so at odds with our values? And it really comes, look, this is a movement it's about politics and it's about power. Faith is, in a way, what they're exploiting. I feel like the religion is being changed to conform to the political agenda, not the other way around. There's another wonderful writer in this space that I work in named Bradley Onishi, who wrote a wonderful book called Preparing for War. And I met Brad years ago when I was doing some research, and I had written about a fellow who came out of a church in Orange County, and Brad had been a youth pastor at that same church. And we started talking, and he said, the belonging is not even really based in religion anymore. Your belonging rests on your political beliefs. And one example of the way that the faith has been changed to conform to the political agenda is if we look at the abortion issue. I mean, when Roe versus Wade passed, most Republican Protestants supported it. The Southern Baptist Convention issued statements in 1961 and 1964 affirming support for abortion law liberalization. Ronald Reagan passed a very liberal, I think the most liberal abortion law. I think it was in 1967. Barry Goldwater, that great conservative hero, he supported abortion law liberalization. His wife, Peggy, co-founded Planned Parenthood in Arizona. Can you imagine a conservative politician's spouse doing that today? Absolutely not. But these folks who called themselves members of the New Right, like Paul Weyrich and Phyllis Schlafly, Howard Phillips, and so many others, they felt at the time, this is like late 1970s, early 1980s, they felt the Republican Party had gone too soft on communism, too liberal. They were very upset about civil rights movement, the women's rights movement. They needed an issue to unite their movement. The thing that really got them up in the morning, of course, was the fact that these racially segregated schools being run by conservative pastors, their tax privileges were being threatened. The IRS was looking at these schools and saying, why are we subsidizing segregation? And they thought they should receive their subsidies for segregation. But that wasn't a really good, wasn't going to be a really popular rallying cry for their new movement. So they needed something that was going to bring together conservative Catholics, conservative Protestants, and also bring in, as one of their members said, some of our fringe fundamentalist, friends. And so they went down the list, and they, when they got to abortion, it was like the light bulb went off. And so we see a kind of pro-life religion today that unites the movement, but it's a modern creation. It was created for political purposes.
Do you think way down deep it's mostly about race?
I think race is a huge factor. I think there have been a lot of studies. Actually, there's a new study by the Public Religion Research Institute, PRRI, Robert P. Jones's outfit, where they look at states. They did a state-by-state analysis where they look at issues of, resentment, white resentment, people who are upset about, growing integration in their communities. You can also look at issues like, the people who are most supportive of this agenda are often people who are not the poor. They're not the poor. They're overwhelmingly white, although their movement has made some inroads among communities of color, particularly Latino communities. But there's a sense of we're losing our privilege, or we're losing our place in society, and we need sort of folks who are in that space are primed, for messages that will intensify their resentments or, intensify their fears. And often their, misinformation chimes with them very, very well, because some of those resentments they may have to do with the fact that they are the folks who knowledge economy left behind. Education is also a huge factor in looking at who is supportive of this movement and who's not. So there are a lot of different factors, but race is one of the very big ones.
It feels to me that we are very fearful, resentful, scared to death people, and race is a part of it, class is a part of it, and then we've got the climate issue. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that the faith community needs to address all of that, and we really don't know what to do. But I'm grateful to you and to Doug. I know our time is short and we need to wrap it up. But I thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I don't know what happens right after this. I see that Pascal is back there. If you wondered where the beautiful piano music was coming from, it wasn't taped. That was Pascal. Thank you, Pascal, for doing that. And so my time's done.
I just want to say thank you. I've read, I read Good News some years ago. And then maybe within the past, year or two, I actually listened on Audible to, where is it? Well,
it's not my voice.
The Power Worshippers.
Thank you for listening.
So and tonight is pretty special because I've had multiple conversations with Doug, but never met him before. So now I met you, and I met you. And we've played your song in our church for at least 5 years, at least once a year, if not more. So this is pretty good. I mean, wow, I didn't even have to pay. I feel like we owe you royalties, though, or something. But yeah, this is great. I just imbibe books like yours. And I like it when journalists do this because they're like news reports. You have a higher standard as a journalist, and so I appreciate John Ward has a new book out, Testimony Inside the Evangelical Movement. One that I found really intriguing is Lerone Martin's Gospel of J. Edgar Hoover. Robert Jones, who you mentioned, so I love reading this stuff, even though I didn't grow up in your churches, as your lyric says. I still am intrigued by all of this. So, I do think that all of this is traceable to race, specifically white supremacy. I think there's a sense of threat, and you mentioned how there are inroads in the Latino community, but there's anti-blackness in Latin America. Mexico has constantly been struggling with this. So when they come, when our Latino brothers and sisters come here, they've already been conditioned to some extent. So none of that is really what my question is about, though. Mine is much easier. Can you help us understand how Christian nationalism is and is not like Zionism?
Wow, that's a great question, and I'm not the right person to answer that question because I've really focused on the American political scene.
So we'll skip over that. You know, I'm on the board for our Central Coast chapter of Planned Parenthood, and when the Dobbs decision came down, we had a vigil out at our government center, and I was one of the speakers, and I said, listen, I understand the outrage. I am outraged too, but if this level of outrage would have been here 2 years ago when the John Roberts Supreme Court gutted voting rights, we probably wouldn't have the panel of Supreme Court justices. So it seems to me that in order to get white progressive stirred up, it has to be more directly related to their concerns. But this is everybody's concern. Voting rights is an issue that black people are more stirred up about. And if we could have found more partnership in that, then who knows where we'd be today.
You're absolutely right about that. One thing that I find very interesting is I think on the sort of moderate liberal left, it's always about policy. But on the right, it's about identity. So they can sort of get people out to vote if they just hit those identity chimes. And for a long time, it was abortion, same-sex marriage. Now they've sort of flipped to a kind of race-baiting CRT stuff, some of the anti-LGBT stuff, which arouses people's anxieties about gender order and family arrangements. And it's really interesting, the whole use of the term woke, which is also a kind of race baiting. But if you think about, do you guys know who Christopher Rufo is? Oh, some of you guys do. So Christopher Rufo is one of the, I would say, thinkers in this movement. He is associated with some of the think tanks, and he's been a policy advisor. And he's had this tweet, where I'm still calling it a tweet, where he said, we're going to, I'm paraphrasing here, decodify the term CRT and basically and then we're going to reconstruct it to mean everything that people don't like. They're going to throw anything they don't like into that bucket. They're doing the same thing with woke. So it's basically kind of race baiting, but it becomes this bucket for all the stuff that people get, who are sort of supportive of their movement, get anxious about. Gender order, race, race and gender order. I mean, we could just stop with that in a way, although there's more stuff there. Environmentalism stuff, policies that are actually supportive, recognize the need for a common good. And so that's how they get their folks out. They just have these words that get everybody activated. And meanwhile, on the sort of moderate liberal left, people are, it's focused on policy initiatives. And there's some good things about that, but then there's some sort of limitations too. We really do need to get better at articulating, as you have done, Doug, an ethos of the common good.
So I was in a conversation with my friend Anna Eskamani, who is the first Iranian American elected to state office in Florida. I met her through Planned Parenthood. So we're talking, and when she said she was the first Iranian American, I said, well, Anna, thank you for helping to prevent Florida from becoming a religious ethno-state. It was supposed to be funny, but it wasn't, I guess. It's kind of serious if you're actually in Florida. But can you explain Florida? That's in the United States still, so you can deal with that question.
Well, Florida, Ron DeSantis, what can we say? He thought he could out-Trump Trump. I can be just as authoritarian as he can. I can be just as cruel and just as macho. And he put out that ad saying that he was chosen by God to lead the state of Florida. He's wants to be ground zero on the war on public education, the war on wokeness. He wanted to take right-wing think tanks, and I think he has, like the Claremont Institute, and establish outposts in Florida. So it becomes a sort of center of the thinkers and strategists of the authoritarian movement. Now, nobody seemed to like him very much, so he dropped out of his bid for the presidency. But unfortunately, a lot of the policies that he has promoted and other politicians have promoted there have passed. But I don't know, a lot of these policies are really deeply unpopular. So it remains to be seen.
Yeah, I don't think it was overkill when the national NAACP put a travel advisory out for African Americans for Florida. And then, last year there was that mass shooting of black people by a white nationalist. So this is where they start. The whole abortion thing, as you described so aptly, anti-abortionism in evangelicalism started in South Carolina at Bob Jones University, who wanted to be segregated, but they couldn't export that patent, blatant kind of racism, to the rest of the country. So, like you said, they settled on abortion. I think that maybe it would be helpful for all of us to remove the filters and talk about race, the conversation that our country still doesn't want to have, and how the racism exists within Christianity, and how we export it to the rest of the world. But you don't want to go to the rest of the world because you're focusing on the U.S. I get that. So, but is there a way to decolonize Christianity, or not Christianity so much, maybe that too, but especially the expressions of it that we're seeing?
Well, it does remind me what you're saying. I'm just going to riff on this just a little bit about this sort of conspiracy theory of the Great Replacement, which is something we're starting to hear more and more in our country. And again, Robbie Jones has done this study to look at what percentage of the population really believes or agrees with this sort of Great Replacement theory, the idea that real Americans are being, removed, and the Democratic Party is trying to bring in aliens in order to replace the real Americans, and the number is astonishingly high, and it's really kind of shocking. But the Great Replacement theory has existed for decades, and it's a conspiracy. But you're also seeing, you do see this kind of Great Replacement theory being exported to other countries. I went to the World Congress of Family gathering in Verona, Italy, a few years ago when I was writing The Power Worshippers, and I described that. So I can talk about that, because I have some direct experience with that, although I did focus on the American actors within that space. But there were a lot of folks there talking about Great Replacement, and that was an expression of anxiety about immigration in their countries. But to see it here, we are a country of immigrants, willingly and unwillingly. So it just seems so bizarre to see this conspiracy theory taking hold here.
Well, let me thank you for your work, and you for your work, and you for your work. I am made stronger because of you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear.
Hey, y'all! I hope you feel like tonight was a starting line and not an ending line. I hope you feel like you can be in some conversation about these things. I will say we're borrowing an extra 7 minutes from you, so our apologies. Katherine has to go. She has another engagement she needed to leave for 7 minutes ago. So bid her fair adieu. If you were planning to speak with her about that, our apologies that she does need to go. we would love to take you with us. We really are going to be going down to San Diego tomorrow, so if you want to go, come with us to San Diego, and then we're going to Simi Valley on Sunday night, and we'd love to take you to Simi Valley with us. And if you can't physically come with us, we'd love for you to go out and sign the bus. We really do take signatures on the bus. It means a lot. We want to fill that bus up as we make our way around this country. We'd love to have your signature on there. We'd also love your signature on a email list out there to be sure that we can stay in touch with you. Both Faithful America and Vote Common Good would love to stay in touch with you for what we do. And as we like to joke, there are 3 things that get us, or 4 things that get us around. I got to get the joke right. There are 4 things that get us around this country. You might know 3 of them: faith, hope, and love. Do you know what the 4th is? Diesel. Diesel is what gets that bus around the country, and we'd love to have you in the tank with us. So if you'd ever like to make a contribution to our work or help us get down the road, we really would appreciate your contribution and to be part of the work that we're doing. By being on our email list, you can do it. You can make a donation at the table to any of the work that we're doing, any of the rest of that stuff. We take all the ways. You can pay with PayPal, you can pay with Venmo, you can pay with cash, a check. You can, if you're into Bitcoin, you can do that, or just bring the marijuana straight to the table and we'll figure out how to sell later. That's also our Bitcoin joke. But really, we'd love for you to feel like you're part of this thing and with us. If you make any donation at all, or don't even want to make a donation, want to take a shirt with you because you want to take some of that along, we'd love to. So we're going to clean up, we're going to get on the move, but we'd love to have you sign the bus and feel like you're part of all this, and those of us other than Catherine that would like to chat with you, if you want to stick around and chat with us. So thank you so much for your hospitality. Thank you to all of our conversation partners and to all of you who are here. So thanks so much for being here. Thanks, y'all.